Okay, hello everybody. We're going to solve this quadrant problem here in this video, and this is a little bit more complex problem than you're used to, so this is a big leap for everyone. So just follow along on on how I'm narrating my thought process as I go through this, and you will see that everything that you need to know is already available to you. Let's just adjust this a little bit. There we go. Okay. So we're asked to keep on asking the user something until they answer no. And that thing that we're going to be doing is asking for an x and y coordinate point and determining which quadrant the coordinate point is in. But it doesn't hurt to just run this without any output, and then you can see exactly how the information looks, right? So we see here there's a 1 and 1, and it has input from the user, and then a quadrant, and then yes or no, they say yes, and they keep at it. And then at the end, it shows how many points for each quadrant were selected or were entered. So let's just do this a step at a time. Let's just work on the part. I'm going to change this and tab that in. There we go. And work on the part that just has to do with them answering yes. So see what I've done here is I've initialized the value of this variable answer to yes. And then I can say while the value of answer is yes, we're going to do something. Well, that something is we're going to see out getting the exact string here. All right, so we're going to see out continue yes or no. They're going to answer. We'll display the answer to the screen. Now, so what does that buy us? Well, this means this will keep running until the person answers something other than yes. Now, notice it's not looking for no, it's just looking for anything that is not yes. Now, this is clearly not going to run, but let's just execute it here for a second. Looks like I have a syntax error somewhere. Let me see what I'm missing here. Oh, well, this is a pretty good thing to look at. We have a ton of errors. Let's see here. So is that from the first run? Here, I'll tell you what. Let me find out, because obviously none of the first one ran. We do have an output from output 1 here. Oh, but there's no output. So it's a little hard to tell. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a bunch of spaces here in this output window, and I'm going to run it again and see if these syntax errors are from my current run or not. Okay, they are. So let's look at them and see what's going on. Wow, that's a ton of stuff. Let's see. Where is, oh yeah, there's all of my empty lines. And somehow I've got the operators mixed up here. See, that's what it says here. So, oh yeah, look what I did here, right? I got C out here, or C in when I meant C out. So you can see, and this is a good example, and there's a ton of errors showing up here, all based on this very first one. So whenever you get a ton of errors, just fix the first one and rerun it and see if in fact that fixes all the other ones. So let's see. It looks like, yep, okay, so you can see what's going, okay, so it's now executed, although it's not running properly, but it has executed, and it says continue yes or no, and the person entered a 1, and so that was the end of that loop, right? Now, note that if I had this as while it's not equal to no, this would run forever because the word no isn't in the input set at all, right? Well, it is actually at some point. Let me see what happens. I think it will eventually run, or it will eventually stop. So let's just try it out and see what we get. Okay, let's look over here. Okay, yeah, so it did work. And luckily, I actually have the word no here, right? So here's all of these other answers that are not no, right? Now, I'm not going to run this because I don't want to wait while it figures out it's an infinite loop. But if I had put capital N-O or capital N, capital O there, then it would never end, and eventually Vocarium would tell you that you have an infinite loop in your code. But let's go back to the original way I had it, which says while the answer is equal to yes, we're going to do something, and it's a good idea. You can put it right in here, do something, right? And then we're going to ask if they want to continue or not. So, so let's look at what the do something is supposed to look like, right? Enter X and enter Y, right? So that tells us we're going to need an integer X and an integer Y. We're going to say cout, enter X, cin, X, cout, X and L. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for Y. Now, this is still not going to match, but let's see how we're doing here. All right, so now we're just missing quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. This message access points are skipped, and then the final solution there. So let's look at the actual output. So we have enter 1, enter X, enter Y, and they're both 1s. But now it's supposed to tell me what quadrant it's in. So let's get rid of this comment because we're already doing something now. Let's put in here what quadrant. Well, let's just check this out. What makes something in a quadrant? Well, it's whether it's positive or negative. And then there's 2 of them. So let's just do one of them. How about this? How about if X is greater than 0 and Y is greater than 0, we go cout quadrant. Well, it's a 1, but it's a Roman numeral 1 or an I and L, and finish that off. Okay, so if X is greater than 0 and Y is greater than 0, then it's quadrant 1. So let's run that. And the, let's see here. So you notice now in the differences here, we don't see the quadrant 1 difference. So here we have enter X1, enter Y1, quadrant 1, continue, yes or no, yes. And actually all the way up to where it's supposed to say quadrant 2 is now working correctly. Well, let's just do this then. Let's copy this one. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then just using the definition of quadrants, right? If X is less than 0 and Y is greater than 0, then it's quadrant 2. And if X is less than 0 and Y is less than 0, then it is quadrant 3. and then if x is greater than 0 and y is less than 0, then it's quadrant 4. So that's just from the definition, a little bit of return to algebra for you, just to keep your math skills fresh. And let's go ahead and run this and see how it goes. Okay, so now the only part we're not getting is this part about access points are skipped, and then quadrant 1 has 1 point, quadrant 2 has 1 point, etc. This stuff here is at the end. So let's just get this working. Let's see what the output looks like. We got 1, 1, quadrant 1, yes. Negative 1, 1, quadrant 2, yes, etc., etc. And then here we have 0 and 100. So what are we saying here? Well, if you look at the sample output, it's supposed to say access points are skipped. Okay, well, what's the access point, or access point? So that's really just something like this, right? If x is equal to 0, or y is equal to 0. Now, this is not an and, this is an or, right? Up here, in order to be in quadrant 4, x has to be greater than 0 and y has to be less than 0. To be on the axis, or one or the other axis, it could be at the origin point, the 0, 0, but it could just be on one or the other axis points, in which case it's x is equal to 0, or, that's the or symbol, or y is equal to 0. So, so let's just put the in here, and the text is access points are skipped. Let me just grab that text. And so that will put that out there. So let's run that. Okay, so now we're not missing the access points are skipped part. So we're getting very close to the solution here. Now let me point out that these 5 possibilities here are all mutually exclusive. It can't be in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, or it can't be in any of these quadrants and on the axis. So it's not a bad idea to make that precise by saying really it's only one or the other of these, right? Or one of these has got to be the case. Now if you wanted to, you could really just make this an else, this access point. Because if it's not in any of the quadrants, that means it's got to be on an access point, or an axis point. So you could do that. Let's run this one and just check that out, and then we'll try taking that out. All right, so that's all passing except for the last part. And now really, let's just try taking this out and run that. See, nothing has changed. It still has the same output. So there's a, different ways to think about this. But one thing, you could leave all these separate ifs, but by doing that, the program's going to check each if statement, even if the previous one was executed. And so it's a little bit slower than if you do this else if, because if it, for example, executes this one, it won't bother checking this, and it won't bother checking this. And so it's an efficiency, and it also makes your program a little clearer. So you could consider that, although a lot of times sometimes you can get away with just the if. But if you have a default case of some sort, you have to do a series of else ifs. Now that was covered in previous chapter, but I'm just reminding you. Okay, so the last bit that we have to do is the how many things in each quadrant. So this is where people get a little bit can get a little bit confused. So let's try a couple of things. Let's call this count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4. All right, so I made 4 integers, count 1 through 4. And I'm going to show you something that I don't know that it's in the book or anything, but I'll just show you. You could do these all in separate lines, but you can also Sorry, here we go. I'm talking and typing at the same time. So you can do, if you want to set all of these and they're all the same data type, if you want to set all of them to 0, you can just do that if you want to. It's a nice little thing. It shortens it up. You don't have to have 4 separate lines for that. But if it confuses you, you could separately set them each to 0. But initially now the counts to everything are 0, and all we want to do here is say count 1 plus plus, which adds 1 to count 1. And to save some time, I'm going to paste these here. But of course I have to be very sure to change variable names. So now I have these counts being done, and so what we would want to do is to display these answers. So let's just do one of them for a moment. It says quadrant 1 had count 1 point with a parenthesis s, oops, s, and L. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so we have a problem. You see what's going on here is this quadrant 1 had 1 points is showing up on every time somebody enters the data right after the continue yes or no thing. Well, why is that showing up there? And you know, this is where students will look at that and say, oh, there's something broken in the compiler or vocarium or something. And that's not the case. What's going on is this. I put this inside of this while loop. Well, it means it's going to execute every time the while loop does. So what I want to do instead is take this and move it to the outside of the while loop. So this will keep on going while the answer is yes. Once the answer is not yes anymore, it will fall through to this case here, and then I can copy this 1, 2, 3, 4. Change this to I, and IV. Make sure I change these 4, 3, 2, and then run it. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, I think, let's see. Quadrant 1 had 1 point. Quadrant 2 had 1 point. And quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. So it certainly looks like it's matching. And so let's go back and see why maybe it isn't. So it turns out that if you look at these, on the original program that I posted, I actually spelled quadrant wrong. So our program is actually spelling it correctly, but this one is spelling it wrong. So I really have 2 options at this point. I think what I will do is I will repost the problem with this spelled correctly so that I don't get a bunch of people getting very, very confused. So I'm going to repost that, but if for now, let's just finish this off by spelling it wrong. I think that's the way it was spelled. Let's try that. Yep, and now all of a sudden all 4 of them passed. So as soon as I go back and adjust the spelling of this thing in that assignment, then in the posted assignment, then spelling it correctly will work. But it's a good experience to see that you know, sometimes what you're trying to the output you're trying to match is not necessarily correct, right? So I will go back and fix that so you don't have to deal with it, but it was an interesting sideline. So recapping here, we have this while loop on the outside with these if statements on the inside, and once that's happened for a while, and we don't know how long it's going to be, right? Because we don't know how many times the person will select no or yes to continue. And so it'll keep doing that until the person doesn't answer yes anymore. And then it will display the resultant values.